got broads in Atlanta. Just took the lean in the family. Credit cards and the scammers. Getting no licks in the band. Legacies.
Hello, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Thank you all for being here tonight on the Jump Off Variety Show. I'm your host, Mad Max. Right above me, you see the sponsor of the show. And down below on the ticker, you could see how to save you some green on some legal green. All right. Max 10% off. That's what you do. Guys, gals, thank you all for being here. Much appreciated. Thank you for those that continue to tune in, to subscribe, to watch. It's very much appreciated, and it means a great deal to me. So thank you all for being here one more time with your boy. I'm up here just so you can see this right now. We're going to go over some basketball history. We're going to go over some basketball news to start things out with, and then I'm going to give you some context, and then we're going to look at some other content from my channel that I watch on YouTube through some other channels and creators, smaller channels that know their history, and you'll get familiar with a lot of things. You're going to learn a lot of things in today's episode. So let's start things off right. The St. Louis Hawks win the 1958 championship. Flashback. They did win the 1958 championship. Absolutely 100%. They beat the Celtics, to be exact, in 6 games to win the 1958 NBA championship, led by Hall of Famer Bob Pettit. And let me tell you right now, for the most part, anybody that's played basketball and her name is Bob, they're going to be good. Whether it's Bob Pettit, whether it's Bob Cousy, whether it's Bob McAdoo, whether it's Big Shot Bob Ori, and there's been multiple Bobs. There's more Bobs than that, I promise. But you kind of get what I'm saying here. Bobs have been serious ballers. They know what to do with the rock, and they're not scared. And before we get to that 1958 finals, and we look at some video clips that I've handpicked, cherry-picked myself, show some love to some other small channels, and I'm a tiny channel. You're talking about 59 subscribers. I haven't even hit 100 subscribers yet. You know, this is a labor of love. It pains me to do it physically, literally, yes. But it's all well worth it because this is where I get to socialize in some way or another with somebody. And as always, link to jump in at any point in time you want in the comments. Feel free to do so. You're always welcome. It's an interactive show. I thought we had a link in there. In case we don't, let me copy that and I'll put it right up in here. I thought it was there already. I apologize. I thought I'd added all those. But now there are links, so you can feel free to hop on in anytime you want, join in the conversation. And yeah, lot of great players. And in the 50s, let's just go back to 1950. And this will come full circle in just a second. In 1950, it was, a crazy time, not only in professional sports and basketball, whatever, but it was a crazy time in America. You're talking about, you think that America's racist now and has problems? I wasn't around in the 50s, though my looks would tell otherwise. The 50s were not a kind time to people of color. And historically, that's the way America has been. That's not my call. That's just unfortunate and true as far as history goes. But just because history went one way doesn't mean that our future is going to end up another, because if anything you could take away is learning from history to make sure that we do not repeat his story. Okay? We don't want to continue to make the same mistakes. But the 50s were definitely a very divided time in America, whether it was sports, whether it was culture, whether it was just being in America. But in sports in particular, we'll talk about basketball. And you know what? I'm going to switch it up a little bit. Let's get the latest news, and then I'll get into this. Let me take a drink real quick, though. This is the Cycling Frog. 50 milligrams of CBD, 50 milligrams of the Delta 9 legal THC. It's got 160 calories per can. It's a 16-ounce can. And these will run you about $26 for a 4-pack. And then I've also got my other one, also 50 milligrams of the THC. And this is the Crescent 9 in a 12-ounce can. It's got 100 calories per serving. And like I said, they're great products. I don't drink alcohol. I don't smoke cigarettes. I haven't for 15 plus years. I don't plan on starting now. Just recently, I wouldn't say just recently, but now that it's become a whole lot more available, I do enjoy the THC infused drinks. I think they're wonderful. I think they're tasty, and I think they do what they're supposed to do. And in my case, I find there to be more pain relief. Relief might be going a little too far, but I don't want to even say less pain. I would say it is better than depending on painkillers to get you through. So it's natural, and I prefer that as opposed to being a junkie or addicted to any kind of medication by your local drug dealer, aka the pharmacists or the doctors that write out the scripts. So that's just me being real. That's me being real and keeping it 100 with you. That's always the way I am, and that's always the way I'm going to be. I don't pull any punches. That's not how I roll. You guys already know this. You don't even have to wonder. I'm going to whoop. No, not down there. Nope, not over there. Sorry. All right. If I go right, I just want there to be enough room to share the screen, and then I guess it automatically adjusts. I want the screen bigger though. So bear with me for just 1 second here, guys. How's that? Does that look all right? All right. And I got it on this lucid mode. I'm not exactly sure why or what that means, but you guys will let me know. I'm sure of it. So let's go over the latest news, if anything, according to Shams. Let me go back to my home page here. And go back to my home page and go to my notifications. Let's go to Shams 42 minutes ago. So we got something cooking, huh? Philadelphia 76ers are signing former Spurs and Hawks forward Dominic Barlow on a two-way NBA contract. Life Sports Agency CEO Todd Ramsar tells ESPN. I believe we covered this yesterday, but just in case, OKC has agreed to terms with Chet Holmgren on his rookie max extension, and that is according to Shams and ESPN. After missing 3 months during the season, Holmgren returned in February and came back stronger to help lead OKC and its young core to the NBA title. The Thunder will now move toward locking in All-NBA superstar Jalen Williams, who has momentum in his rookie extension talks. And when they say Jalen Williams, they are not talking about the other Jalen Williams. They're talking about the one that they refer to as J. Will. J. Will. We already got that. $250 million, huh? Up to. Not bad, Chet. Not bad. $250 million. fully guaranteed 5-year max rookie contract extension. If you get that 250, Chet, good for you, buddy. Kelly Olynyk, I think we went over that yesterday with the Wizards. Pretty sure we did. I'm 99.9% sure we did. And Anthony Davis, yeah, so it doesn't look like there's been a whole lot happening according to Shams. Not yet as of today. Nothing new. 6 hours ago is when we had the Spurs and Hawks do the two-way contract between, the Philadelphia 76ers are signing former Spurs and Hawks forward Dominic Barlow on a two-way NBA contract. And like I said, that's according to Live Sports Agency CEO Todd Ramasar and ESPN. So not a whole lot to talk about in basketball news as of yet. But we're going to go one more place and double check there. Yahoo Sports. You read my mind. And make sure that it's still up. And it is. All right. I don't know if I can figure out how to turn this lucid mode off. Whatever it is, however you do it. I don't know. It's weird. I don't think I'm a fan of it. You guys will let me know, I'm sure, though. But anyway, back on here to Yahoo Sports. Let's go here. Let's go NBA. And this is all still from the finals right there. News, free agency. Speaking of which, tomorrow night's show, we're going to do a watch-a-thon and still going to start at 7 p.m., 7 Central Standard Time to be exact. And we're going to go ahead and watch the debut of the number 1 overall pick, Cooper Flagg, as he debuts against the Lakers and Bronny James in Las Vegas. And there's going to be several games that night, or tomorrow night rather. But we will definitely start off at 7, and we'll see how things go. We'll see how the young man looks. And news-wise, Holmgren extension. Former NBA guard Ben McLemore sentenced to over 8 years in prison after being found guilty of grape. Terrible. The former top 10 NBA pick will be sentenced next Wednesday, and that's according to Yahoo Sports as of 4 hours ago. NBA power rankings. The West is loaded again. Here's how all 15 teams stack up after off-season upgrades. Why 18-year-old Cooper Flagg is ready to lead the Dallas Mavericks. Before we go off in the weeds and talking about leading this and leading that, let's see how he does tomorrow night in his debut. Let's start with that. Jokic is going to pass on the extension. That is one thing that the rumor mill has been saying as of late. I believe I heard that yesterday. And aside from that, the only other crazy thing that I heard was KD saying this and that about Jordan. But honestly, if you want to criticize Michael Jordan, there's not really a lot of criticism there as far as his game goes, what he was able to do on the floor. Anything aside from that, listen, if the man won 3 championships, left for 18 months, came back, and then was able to win you 3 more championships, what are you going to knock him for? Are you mad at him because his father was murdered and he took some time off and his father's dream was for him to play baseball? And maybe he honored his father by doing what he did, getting right in the head and doing what he thought was right for him in that case. And obviously after the 98 season, Phil Jackson not coming back pretty much sealed the deal for Michael not returning. And as far as the comeback after that, when he came out of the executive suite to play with the Wizards, he donated $1 million, which was his salary for that 01-02 season, to the victims and survivors of the 9/11 attacks. And then the next year he went on to play, which was his last, season playing in the league, the 02-03 season. So say what you want, Kevin Durant, about Michael Jordan. You used to sit here and say nothing but good things about him, but now you want to try to badmouth him a little bit here and there. You're entitled to your opinion, but don't flip-flop. It's either one or the other. It can't be both. Like I said, you can't drive a car and forward and reverse at the same time. That's not the way things work. That's not how it happens. So recognize that. Next, let's talk about the 1950s and basketball. A lot of notable things happened in the 50s. In 1950, it was a decade of significant change and growth for basketball, particularly in the NBA. The league saw the introduction of the 24-second shot clock, the first African-American players, and the rise of dominant teams like the Minneapolis Lakers. It also faced challenges like team contraction and a referee scandal, but ultimately emerged as a more stable and popular league. And if you go back past, right now we have the current NBA, you had the Basketball Association of America, so you had the BAA and the NBL, which ultimately turned into the NBA. You had other leagues like the ABA, which folded, and you had some other smaller leagues. So you had plenty of basketball going on throughout, the 20th century, and even at the end of the 19th century and up till present day. So the game has evolved, the game has grown. The decade in the 50s began with the merger of the BAA and the NBL, forming the modern NBA. The 24-second shot clock was introduced in 1954 by Danny Viscone, and the shot clock aimed to speed up the game and improve its entertainment value. Makes sense, right? Then integration. The 1950-51 season marked the beginning of the NBA's integration with the first African-American players, and in that, the first three African-American players in the NBA were Earl Lloyd, Chuck Cooper, and Nat Clifton. They all entered the league in 1950, with Lloyd being the first to play in a regular season game, Cooper the first to be drafted, and Clifton the first to sign a contract. And you know what team and what coach drafted the first NBA player of color? The Boston Celtics and Red Auerbach. Do you know who had the first starting five of all black players? The Boston Celtics and Red Auerbach. And that was 64, if I'm not mistaken. Also, the Minneapolis Lakers, led by George Mikan, dominated the early part of the decade, winning 5 championships. The first NBA All-Star game, the league held its first All-Star game in 1951, showcasing its best players. Team contraction and the referee scandal. The NBA also faced challenges, including a contraction that reduced the number of teams and a scandal involving a referee fixing games. That's never happened in modern times. League stabilization. Despite these challenges, the NBA gradually stabilized. It became more popular with 8 teams in the late 1950s. 8 teams, okay? So that's why when you go, and we'll talk about this here in just a second, the format for which, and I believe we talked about it also, 3 rounds, 1, 2, and 3, didn't change until after the 1983 season. So 1984, it was a 4-round playoff versus the last 3-round playoff, which was 1983. And we know that because the Philadelphia 76ers won the 1983 championship in a sweep of the Los Angeles Lakers, which we covered yesterday. So next, we have like I said, as far as notable players go in the 50s, you guys have all heard of Elgin Baylor. You've heard of Will Chamberlain. You know who Bill Russell is. You know George Mikan. You know Bob Pettit. You're going to really know Bob Pettit here in a little bit. Elgin Baylor and these guys, they all helped shape the future of the league. They laid the foundation, the groundwork. So these modern players can have these luxuries that other players did not have back in the 50s. It was crazy, but it's true. Now, next thing I'm going to bring up here, and I will show you. Let me go back here to Google. Hold on. Or let me just push the home button. Probably be easier. Sorry. Something we need to look at here. No, not Dwight Gooden. We're not looking for Dwight Gooden. Come on. You know what? Let's just go here. Let's just do this. And do this. And this. And this. And we'll go there. We're going to learn a little bit about St. Louis and its history of basketball first. And then you'll have a better understanding of what is what. And I'm going to throw a lot of different facts out at you, so you might have to take note. And then we'll watch a few of these little videos that I cherry picked and found. All right, so make sure it's still showing up here. There we go. All right. St. Louis has a rich basketball history featuring 2 NBA teams and a prominent ABA team. The St. Louis Bombers from 1946 through 1950 and the St. Louis Hawks from 1955 through 1968 represented the city in the NBA, with the Hawks winning the NBA championship in 1958. Additionally, the Spirits of St. Louis from 1974 to 76 played in the ABA before the league merged with the NBA. Now, about the merger, there were 6 teams left in 1976 when the merger occurred in the ABA. You had the Spirits of St. Louis, the Kentucky Colonels, Indiana Pacers, the Nets, the Nuggets, and the Spurs. With the exception of the Spirits of St. Louis, or the St. Louis Spirits, whatever you want to call them, and the Kentucky Colonels, the other 4 teams were brought into the NBA. So there's a little bit of history for you there. Also, they had the St. Louis Bombers, the original team, one of the original teams in the Basketball Association of America, the BAA, which, as we said, later became the NBA, and they lasted from 46 to 50. The Hawks were there from 55 to 68 before they were the Hawks, though. Before they were the St. Louis Hawks, they were the Tri-City Blackhawks, and they played between Davenport. They played in Moline in Illinois, and then I believe it was Rockport, Illinois. And then from the Tri-State Hawks, they went and became the Milwaukee Hawks. From the Milwaukee Hawks, they became the St. Louis Hawks. And from the St. Louis Hawks, they became the Atlanta Hawks. So the St. Louis Hawks, previously the Milwaukee Hawks, but before that, like I said, they were the Tri-City Blackhawks. They relocated to St. Louis and achieved significant success, including the 1958 NBA championship. The Hawks featured stars like Bob Pettit, Slater Martin, and Clyde Leveillette. And as far as ABA teams go, the Spirits of St. Louis from 74 to 76, originally the Carolina Cougars, the team moved to St. Louis and played in the ABA. One of the reasons that the teams moved to St. Louis was so they could be in a bigger market, therefore get absorbed by the NBA, or so that's what they had originally thought. The Silner brothers, who owned the team and named it the Spirits, inspired by a conversation with the owner of the St. Louis Blues. The team was known for its talented roster, including Marvin Barnes and Moses Malone. That's right. But also for its off-the-court issues, which they did have some as well. And I have actually cherry-picked something about the Spirits of St. Louis we're going to watch. So it'll be fun. We're going to get there, guys. I promise. Other notable aspects, the St. Louis Arena, also known as the Checker Dome. The arena was home to both the Hawks and the Spirits, the Kiel Auditorium. The Hawks also played some seasons at the Kiel Auditorium. The K-Fitz Arena, the current home of the St. Louis Billikens men's basketball team. And St. Louis Billikens again, the St. Louis University men's basketball team has a long and storied history with multiple NCAA tournament appearances. So there's a little bit of history about St. Louis and basketball and about the Hawks. Now, here is something that a lot of you probably don't know. The first NBA MVP was Bob Pettit. That's correct. Bob Pettit was the first NBA MVP. I know you didn't know that. What else is special about this 1958 championship St. Louis Hawks team is the fact that they are the first, the only, and the last unintegrated team in the NBA to win a championship. In short, they had no people of color. They were an entirely white Caucasian team. They were the last team, the only team in NBA history to win a championship. Like I said, the integration started back in 1950. And like I said, who drafted the first black player? That was the Celtics and Red Auerbach. And that first black player, I'm pretty sure I told you, was Earl Lloyd. Yeah, that's exactly what I told you. Excuse me. So just keep that in mind. The St. Louis Hawks is a team that was full of nothing but white guys. It was an all-white basketball team. Okay? All white. All white. Every other team, they had people that were non-white as well as white people, but not St. Louis. All white. And in 1957, they were in the NBA Finals representing the Western Conference. You know who they played? That's right. They played the Boston Celtics. Took them to Game 7 in overtime and lost. The very next year, they went back as the Western Conference representative in the finals against who? The Boston Celtics. And what happened? Well, I'll tell you what happened. Bob Pettit dropped 50 points. The Celtics won in 6. And Bob Pettit scored 18 of the last 21 points in the last 5 minutes of the game, if I'm not mistaken. But you'll see this all for yourself here in just a moment. So Bob Pettit, your first NBA MVP. That's right. And the 1958 Hawks were non-integrated. They were all white. Every one of them. Okay? So, kind of like we learned about Billy Cunningham, the coach of the 76ers yesterday. He not only won a championship as a player, he won one as a coach for the same team. How cool would that be? Just saying. We're going to teach you. You're going to hear some names that you've probably never even heard of before. Some facts and some history that you were unaware of. But the more you know, the better off you're going to be, especially if you're a student of the game and you love basketball and want to learn as much as you can about it. And from whatever resource you can get this information from, I encourage you to do so. Simple as that. Now I'm going to pull up my YouTube channel. And we're going to go to my channel, which is the best channel, right? Right. Going to go to my playlists. We're going to go to my favorites. My favorites, which is right here.
The ABA.
Oops. We're going to turn that off. Make sure that I'm still here with the screen. Yes, we are. Good. Now, like I said, I cherry picked these videos in particular. Number one, because they have accurate knowledge, and everything else that needed to be spoken of, I've done already in way of any additional missing facts. So the videos that I'm going to show you, I picked 3 of them, which is going to put us roughly right at that hour's mark. And I think that you will have a better understanding and a greater respect for these players in the 50s. And we could also recap the 50s with another video. So I was going to originally just play 2 regarding St. Louis, but I'm going to play a 3rd one because it also has some relevant events that happened in the 50s. The first channel and the first video we're going to look at is from Logan Basketball. Bob Pettit's Revenge is the name of it. Ancient NBA Episode 2. The thing about Logan Basketball is, and I'll pull it up here maybe. Let me get it up here. This young man, and I'll pull him up. He's got a little over 4,000 subscribers. He's seems like a really nice, knowledgeable young man that puts in the work to, put out good content. And he's dealing with Crohn's disease and arthritis, so I can relate to that. I definitely respect that. He's got over 4 million views, so 1,700 videos. The kid's putting in his work. Give him his credit, and let's see what he's got for us to learn today. Let me go back, and we're going to play that video.
Every NBA championship.
Right.
This week we're going back to
Hold
1958.
on a second here. Now I got to fix the sound because it's coming out of where I don't want it to. Let me see if that worked.
Every NBA championship. This week we're going back to 1958. The St. Louis Hawks are going home.
Why don't you want to work? All right, let me get in here. Wait a minute. There's a lucid thing. There, I turned off the lucid thing. Thank God. All right. I turned it off on that at least. It's still popping up over here on mine. But I don't want it to not come through the speakers, so I don't want to mute screen audio. Let me get in here, guys. I apologize once again. Yes. Everything good there. So I don't see. Let's get in here and try this one more time.
After a double overtime loss to the Boston Celtics in Game 7 of the 1957 NBA Finals, Hawks star Bob Pettit is pissed. He knew his team could have beaten the Celtics. They just couldn't make shots when it mattered in the final seconds. Pettit does not want this to happen again. This season will be spent figuring out how to get back to the NBA Finals. Meanwhile, in Boston, they're celebrating their first ever title.
Now, this is bothersome simply because my speaker doesn't want to turn off, and I don't know why. It's like the off button is not working. Let's try that.
Bill Russell, Bob Cousy, and Tom Heinsohn had figured out how to beat the Hawks and were now working on their second title run. They knew they were good enough to be the NBA's next dynasty, and that was the goal: win as many championships as possible. And with their 9 future Hall of Famers, that should be a relatively easy task. But out west in Minneapolis, the Lakers were regrouping after a Western Finals loss to St. Louis. They lost their Western Division crown and were trying to get back their dynasty status after winning 5 titles in the late 40s and early 50s. But things wouldn't get much better after getting swept by the Hawks in 1957. The Lakers would fall to 19-53 this year, the worst record in the league. There was a silver lining though.
Bear with me again. I apologize. There's that. Now,
every NBA championship. This week we're going back to 1958. The St. Louis Hawks are going home after a double overtime loss to the Boston.
All right. Now we've got everything figured out. Let me turn down the volume just a hair and start this over. I apologize about the delay. Once again, Logan Basketball. Check them out. Let's watch this video.
Every NBA championship. This week we're going back to 1958. The St. Louis Hawks are going home after a double overtime loss to the Boston Celtics in Game 7 of the 1957 NBA Finals. Hawks star Bob Pettit is pissed. He knew his team could have beaten the Celtics. They just couldn't make shots when it mattered in the final seconds. Pettit does not want this to happen again. This season will be spent figuring out how to get back to the NBA Finals. Meanwhile, in Boston, they're celebrating their first ever title. Bill Russell, Bob Cousy, and Tom Heinsohn had figured out how to beat the Hawks and were now working on their second title run. They knew they were good enough to be the NBA's next dynasty, and that was the goal: win as many championships as possible. And with their 9 future Hall of Famers, that should be a relatively easy task. But out west in Minneapolis, the Lakers were regrouping after a Western Finals loss to St. Louis. They lost their Western Division crown and were trying to get back their dynasty status after winning 5 titles in the late 40s and early 50s. But things wouldn't get much better after getting swept by the Hawks in 1957. The Lakers would fall to 19-53 this year, the worst record in the league. There was a silver lining though, as they had the number 1 pick on draft day, but that day has yet to come for Minneapolis, who will have to watch from home as the St. Louis Hawks continue their domination of the Western Division. They finished the regular season winning 41 games, but that wasn't the best record in the league. That belongs to Boston, winning 5 more games than the previous season when they hung their first banner. They had won, but it was as close as it can get. In double overtime of Game 7, they knew St. Louis had a chance at figuring out how to beat them. Bill Russell's mission was to not let that happen, and to start the playoffs off, he'd lead Boston to a 4-1 series win over the Philadelphia Warriors. They were headed to their second straight NBA Finals, confirming what the league thought, and that this was the NBA's new dynasty. But they would have to play the games, and St. Louis had won the Western Finals, beating the Detroit Pistons in last year's final.
And yes, you did hear him correctly when he said Philadelphia Warriors. That is correct. Now, the Syracuse Nationals became the Philadelphia 76ers. So, just to make sure that there's no confusion on that. Back to the video.
Finals, when the Celtics struggled to score the ball, they could turn to Tom Heinsohn, who would almost always come through with 20 points when Boston needed him. But Hawks player Cliff Hagan had seen that in last year's finals. He was a rookie last year too, but now in his second year, he got much more playing time, and the former Kentucky Wildcat was leading the playoffs in scoring. And with Bob Pettit's shooting prowess, St. Louis had found a way to get even better this year. Boston's got one hell of a challenge ahead of them as the Hawks come into the Garden for Game 1. Hagan and Pettit go off with 33 and 30 points respectively. And on top of the scoring depth St. Louis has, the Celtics can't hit this game. At 32% from the field, Bill Russell's 29 rebounds helped keep the Celtics in the game, and Boston as a team had 17 more boards than St. Louis, but it didn't matter, as the Hawks take Game 1 of the 1958 NBA Finals in Boston. The Celtics had some regrouping to do. They couldn't have another shooting performance like that, because although they have the god of defense and rebounding, it's basketball, where good offense beats good defense. The Hawks have 2 lights-out scorers that are impossible to defend, and St. Louis would use that scoring to try for a second win in Boston before heading back home. Russell wasn't having any of that down 0-2 stuff. He lit a fire under his team, and it worked. 7 players scored in the double digits, and 4 guys scored 20 or more, shooting 46% as a team. All that offense plus a great defensive game, holding the Hawks to just 35% as a team. Cliff Hagan went off for 37, but the team as a whole couldn't handle Boston's defense and lost the rebound battle by 32 boards as the Celtics obliterate the Hawks in Game 2 by 24 points. Bob Pettit has to get his team back as the Hawks head home to St. Louis. He knows that when the Celtics are playing at their best, they're unbeatable. So the Hawks would just have to play at their highest level and hope that a little luck would roll their way. It was as if the ball gods knew the Celtics were.
And I don't mean to spoil anything, but there was an injury in Game 3 to Bill Russell and his ankle, if I'm not mistaken, that may or may not have affected the game in the series. But honestly, I don't believe that to be true, simply because of what the Hawks were able to do. Yes, Russell was out, but that Boston squad was stacked. They were stacked. Anyway, back to the video.
Super team. In Game 3, Bill Russell sprains his ankle after scoring 14 points and 13 rebounds. He would sit out the rest of the game, and St. Louis took advantage of the lack of stellar defense down low, shooting a much better 42% on the game. But the Celtics still have 8 other Hall of Famers. And if the Hawks were going to get their second win,
8 Hall of Famers.
Bob Pettit drops 32, and former Minneapolis Laker Slater Martin's 17 pushed the Hawks barely over the Celtics in Game 3, 111 to 108. Now up 2-1 over the Celtics, the Hawks had one more game at home where the Celtics would have to stay poised. Bill Russell had been hurt in Game 3, and it didn't look like he was coming back in the series. After a major blow to Boston, who drafted Bill Russell as the missing piece to their championship-level culture they were trying to build, the dynasty status they were trying to achieve hangs in the balance. But Celtics coach Red Auerbach isn't making excuses. He knows this team at their best is still better than St. Louis. He ain't worried because he believes in them.
It's true.
And in Game 4, his team would prove him right, beating the Hawks at Kiel Auditorium by 11 without Bill Russell. The Celtics were a good defensive team, even without Russell, holding Bob Pettit to 3 for 17 this game. And while Cliff Hagan went off for 27 points, Boston was comfortable letting one man score and locking everybody else up. So
one thing to also keep in mind is that the Hawks also had a stacked team that was, like I said, non-integrated, meaning they did not have any players of color, or uncolored if you want to be technical, since black and white are not colors. They had no black players at all. The Hawks were a completely white team full of white guys, ultra talented white guys. And that's not to discount anything or anybody else, but just to give you an idea, that would be almost unheard of in this day and age. Could you imagine? You might have seen some rotations and players on the floor, but I'm talking about the entire team. Okay? Let's get back to it.
Head back to Boston for Game 5. With the series tied 2-2, St. Louis knows that in just 2 wins, people would start considering the Hawks as the NBA's new dynasty. Making it to 2 straight finals was impressive, but dynasties win championships. And in Game 5, Pettit made a strong argument for the start of that dynasty. With 21 rebounds and 33 points, Hagan would back him up with 20 points, 13 rebounds, and 4 assists. In another ugly defensive battle, where neither team shot above 34% on the game, the Celtics are overwhelmed by the offense of Slater Martin, who dropped 25 points on the game, helping the Hawks to a 2-point win, their second at the Boston Garden this series. For St. Louis, their chances now. After going up 3-2 on the Celtics, they head back to St. Louis for their last home game of the series, where if they won, would be their first championship in franchise history.
One other thing to keep in mind, like I said, since the All-Star games did start in the 1950s, while the Hawks were in St. Louis, they actually hosted 3 All-Star games, and Bob Pettit was the All-Star Game MVP on a losing team. The West lost to the East, and he was still the MVP. Bob Pettit. You're going to remember this name, and you're going to learn some other names here in this next video clip after this one's done. But Logan basketball, for the most part, he has all his facts right. He's put in the work. Nothing but, hey, keep grinding, brother. Keep grinding. Let's get back to it.
The pressure was now on Boston. And although Red Auerbach had lit up the team to take game 4 without Bill Russell, they desperately missed that winning mentality, as Pettit was proving to be unguardable, on top of his own mentality of dominance. Pettit had an entire year to think about last year's finals loss, the heartbreak of making it to a double overtime of Game 7.
Double overtime Game 7.
He never wanted to go back.
Lost by 2
So he goes
points.
absolutely insane, dropping a finals record that still stands to this day of 50 points. Giannis actually tied it back in 2020. Pettit was the definition of leaving it all on the court, grabbing 21 boards on top of all those points. But the Celtics were still coming at the Hawks. Bill Sharman dropped 26, Tom Heinsohn had 23, to just about cancel out Pettit's legendary scoring performance. But Pettit wouldn't be canceled and erupted in the fourth quarter with 19 of the Hawks' last 21 points. The last 2 he scored,
19 of his last 21 points.
107. And unfortunately for Boston, it was 1958, and there was no three-point line in the NBA yet. The Celtics managed to make it down and score, but they lost the game, 110-109. Bob Pettit and Cliff Hagan had just won St. Louis, their first ever franchise title, and now the league was looking at St. Louis as the frontrunners to be the NBA's next dynasty. Boston's coach Red Auerbach wasn't making any excuses for the loss, as the media speculated whether St. Louis would have won if Bill Russell hadn't gone down. Auerbach says, "You can always look for excuses. We just got beat." Bill Russell had a fire in his eyes. The ball gods had taken his chance at a second title from him. He would start working again at another finals appearance next year, as Boston's hopes to become a dynasty weren't totally gone, but there were questions. Questions Russell would start answering in the offseason with work. Meanwhile, in Minneapolis, no one was paying attention to the now former dynasty of the Lakers, who had just finished last in the NBA. As bad as it looked on the team, there would be a light at the end of the tunnel. It's draft day, and with the first pick in the 1958 NBA draft, the Minneapolis Lakers select Elgin Baylor out of the University of Idaho, as they look to rebuild the dynasty they protected so well in the early 50s. Cool. That's it for this week's video. Y'all, I appreciate you for watching. If you made it this far, let me know what you think about this video in the comments. And if you didn't see last week's video, check that out. Also, I need to shout out Spar.
And just to let you know, I was going to mention the fact as far as, hold on, let me just take it back just a second. The Lakers, when the Lakers were still in Minneapolis, they were still the Minneapolis Lakers. But in 1960, they moved to Los Angeles and became the Los Angeles Lakers. So Los Angeles Lakers began in 1960, won their first NBA championship in 1972. You had the stacked team back then too. You had Jerry West. You had, Elgin Baylor played 9 games in that season, but at the same time, he still got a championship ring. You had Wilt, you had Gail Goodrich, you had so many great players that nobody remembers. But that's why we're here. Like I said, we're not going to be the echo chamber that all the other channels are, talking about LeBron, Kobe, and Jordan. Not that they don't deserve any kind of, you should always speak about great players, sure, but like I said, there's more than just 3 players that have played in this league. Next video we want to watch and go through is going to be about the other St. Louis franchise, and it'll give you a little bit of history about the Spirits of St. Louis, the ABA, and how things kind of worked out. And to top things off, we're going to watch one more video after that, and it's going to kind of sum up the 57-58 season and all the other things that happened that we might have missed. There's some things that you will probably learn, and this video is going to be courtesy of the Sports Vault, and let's get into it. And
the ABA and
the Sports Vault, it's got 598 subscribers. It's a small channel. It's got 65 videos, but this individual knows what he's talking about, and I recommend that you give him a look. Like I said, I'm plugging sports channels, smaller ones, and we all help each other grow. So, and that's not to diminish anything from Raw Sports Radio, Water God TV, Hickory, the Dank and Underwhelming TDAU, and Rolling Hay Podcast -VR. So nothing but respect. Give shout outs to this young man and his creation. Let's help him grow as well. Like I said, I'm not out here to be greedy. I'm here to help. That's what I want to do. And you know what? Sharing and elaborating and giving context on the topics that we speak to, that's what is important. Remembering history, learning from history, not repeating history. All right, so let's back up and I'll get
the ABA and defunct teams are now officially dead, becoming ghosts of the game. But what is a ghost? Why does the symbolism of the supernatural always pop up in subtle stories, even via the medium of professional sports?
The Spirits of St. Louis had the ultimate last laugh. The Cylinders distributed hats to anybody and everyone who wanted to have them. And those hats basically said something very clear. They said Spirits of St. Louis in the front, on the back, in spirit, in perpetuity. The Spirits of St. Louis will live on forever.
You can feel its presence, but can't touch it. You know it's there, but can't see it. The fifth element on our planet, after earth, water, air, and fire, is spirit, the force of intangibility that guides us all from a realm not contained in our own. Spirit can also produce spirits, which are supernatural beings or essence. The most supernatural sports contract in history manifested out of the merger between the ABA and NBA in 1976. While the National Basketball Association absorbed all but 4 ABA teams, one of the odd teams out, the Spirits of St. Louis, set to become the lingering ghost for the growing league in perpetuity for forever. The Spirits of St. Louis were a basketball franchise based in St. Louis that played in the American Basketball Association, ABA, from 1974 to 1976.
a very short-lived run.
Were a colorful team featuring a number of players, both on and off the court, who were fairly successful in their basketball careers. Future NBA Hall of Famer Moses Malone was acquired during their second and final season. Maurice Lucas became an NBA All-Star with the Portland Trail Blazers. Former Boston Celtics six-man Don Chaney, future Celtics head coach ML Carr, and Ron Boone, who held the record for consecutive games played in pro basketball for many years. But one of the most colorful players on the team was forward Marvin Barnes.
Marvin Barnes and the Spirits of St. Louis existed for only 2 short years, but during that time, they transformed both pro basketball and the business of pro sports. The Spirits are the NBA's 31st team because of that incredible.
And if you want to know about Marvin Barnes, and they'll get into Marvin Barnes slightly in this, let me know, drop it in the comments, and I'll do a thing about Marvin Barnes, along with some other notorious NBA players of the past. So just let me know. Back to the video.
TV rights deal and the notorious escapades of Marvin Barnes, I think the spirits may be more relevant today than when the ABA folded 40 years ago. If you want to take a single franchise that captured everything, just about everything, that was crazy about the ABA, look no further than the spirits of St. Louis.
David said, no, we're not going to get out of here unless we make a deal. I had no idea that they were going to insist upon 4 teams. We thought it would be 6. I did. The 4 teams from the ABA that went into the NBA were the Denver Nuggets, the Indiana Pacers, the San Antonio Spurs, and the New York Nets.
Brooklyn Nets
Critics
currently.
all say it was because of Marvin's erratic play and his irresponsibility and the rumors of his drug use that the NBA did not want the spirits included in the merger.
Barnes was not the reason why the NBA owners didn't want a franchise there. They'd had a very successful NBA team in St. Louis. They'd won a world championship. Bob Pettit was a star on that team, but they couldn't make it, and they moved to Atlanta. The NBA owners did not want a team back in St. Louis.
They didn't think St. Louis was ready for NBA play. They didn't think they were financially stable.
The ABA offered to purchase the remaining 2 franchises for $3 million each. John Brown, the owner of the Colonels, negotiated and took a deal of $3.3 million. The Silner brothers and their attorney, however, turned down the offer. They were unhappy about not being included in the NBA merger. After all, they had moved the team to a bigger market for the specific purpose of increasing their chances of getting to the NBA.
Keep this thought in mind of how disgruntled the Silner brothers were when they got the short end of the stick. Once we symbolically summarize the spirit.
Part of their thought was, look, this keeps us connected to the league.
And that brings up another point that we made earlier. As far as not being ready for an NBA franchise, you had franchises there already. They were bringing in crowds. They were winning championships. They were hosting all-star games. So it's a little contradictory, if you ask me, as to why St. Louis was left without a basketball team. And in my final monologue, after we're done with the videos and the reactions, I'll let you know how I feel. But back to it.
This is our entry point. Maybe through this connection, they haven't closed the door on us. Maybe through this, we'll get a franchise.
We're going to have kind of a vested interest in this situation so that perhaps one day we're going to come into the NBA, because that was the dream of these guys.
I think if you had said to the Silners, you can have this deal going forward, or you can have a franchise, they would have taken the franchise.
At the time, it made logical sense, considering the fact that basketball-related television viewership and revenue was tiny compared to what it is today. Even the NBA playoffs were not broadcasted live. Due to this lucrative deal, ABA teams got no NBA TV money for the first 3 years. At first, giving the Silners annual payment of 4/7 of the television revenue that the other NBA franchises received did not seem like a heavy cost. In 1980, the first year of the deal, it yielded a modest revenue of $522,000 as the NBA struggled with spotty attendance and weak TV ratings. This would represent roughly 2% of the entire league's television revenue. In 1982, after cashing in a couple checks, the Silners came close to accepting a new buyout. The NBA offered them $5 million over 8 years, but they once again countered with a demand of $8 million over 5. The league hesitated at that number, and so the Silners would continue to cash in.
This is where things get scary, and the spirits of St. Louis become a monetary nightmare for the NBA due to their perpetuity payments. Even after death, some spirits remain tethered to this world due to unfinished business. Best-selling, award-winning author and intuitive medium Melissa Alvarez has said, "There are souls who never really transition but hang around on the earthly plane due to feeling they need to watch over someone or they need to help others. There are cases where the spirit cannot let go of the negative emotions either surrounding their death or their life. These spirits fail to release from this world and cling to it. This is a matter of exerting free will. and those spirits remain tethered to this world until they are ready to leave.
By the 1980s and 90s, the league began to explode in popularity with the emergence of stars like Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. Finally, when Michael Jordan, his airness himself, arrived on the scene in 1984, the NBA was headed in the right direction.
Yes.
Cable television increased in popularity as a growing number of Americans
Facts.
had disposable income and barriers to technology began to decrease. And although the former ABA owners had numerously attempted to buy out the contract twice in the past, with the brothers never considering either offer, this time was different. Eventually, in January of 2014, after 40 years and paying out nearly $1/3 billion, the brothers in the league finally came to an agreement in which the NBA reportedly paid them an additional $500 million, plus a small fixed annual amount to get out of the original agreement. The deal cut by the brothers and the incredible amount of revenue it has produced over the years has itself become legendary. Not only will it forever be a part of NBA history, but it will also go down as one of the greatest sports deals ever made.
Wonderful video. Well done. Great job. Sports Vault. Check them out. Give them a shot. Well worth it. Knows the stuff. And I can't say enough good things about it. We got one more video to look at, and this one here is going to sum up basically that 1958 season and all the highlights / lowlights / wild things that happened. It's about 9 minutes long, and then we're going to wrap things up with my monologue and get ready for tomorrow night's show. So let's watch this one here. Let me put it up.
Spy World is app. I'm gonna keep
The ABA and defunct team.
Spy World is app. I'm gonna keep this intro.
All right. Now this is Spa World. Spa World has just under 2,000 subscribers, 962 videos. This young man knows his stuff. He's a student of the game. He's very, very, very relatable, personable, and has great content. And I wish him nothing but the best. I want to see him grow. And, you know, same with all these smaller channels that we're plugging. We don't need to plug the big channels because you already know them. These are the less known, the guys that, like I said, sometimes fall through the cracks. And unless you know where to look and find them, then you'll never do it. But let's get into the video, and let me put it back up here. Let me make sure it's showing up on the StreamYard as it should, and it is. And let's get right into it with this video featured by Spa World. Show him some love. This young man, he really impresses me with his knowledge of the game and being a student of the game and respecting the history of it. So let's get into it.
Spy World is app. I'm gonna keep this intro short. One, I'm a huge NBA fan if you didn't know. Secondly, history is so important. So in this series, we're gonna be looking at everything you need to know from every year of NBA, starting with the 1957 to 58 season. Let's get into some quick facts. This season marked the 12th season of the NBA. The season began on October 24th, 1957 and ended on March 22nd, 1958. The league expanded to 8 teams, adding the Detroit Pistons and the Syracuse Nationals. The NBA took giant strides in cementing its big league image when the Fort Wayne Pistons moved to Detroit and the Rochester Royals moved to Cincinnati. Just 3 years earlier, half the NBA teams were based in metropolitan areas with less than 1 million people. Now only Syracuse was in that category. The league introduced a new rule that limited teams to 6 personal fouls per player.
A quick note here, and this is something that just popped in my head. The oldest franchise in the NBA is none other than the modern Sacramento Kings. They have been around longer than any other franchise in NBA history since 1923, if I'm not mistaken. Just one fact that I thought that I'd share that I just remembered. So let's get back to it.
year instead of the previous 8. On March 12, 1958, in the last game of the 1957-58 NBA regular season, Cincinnati Royals player Maurice Stokes was knocked unconscious after he drove to the basket, drew contact, and struck his head as he fell to the court. He was revived with smelling salts and returned to the game. 3 days later, after recording 12 points and 15 rebounds in an opening round playoff game against the Detroit Pistons, he became ill on the team's flight back to Cincinnati. Stokes later suffered a seizure and was left permanently paralyzed. He was diagnosed with post-traumatic encephalopathy, a brain injury that damaged his motor control center. During the years that followed, Stokes would be supported and cared for by his lifelong friend and teammate Jack Twyman, who became Stokes' legal guardian. Although permanently paralyzed, Stokes was mentally alert and communicated by blinking his eyes. He adopted a grueling physical therapy regimen that eventually allowed him limited physical movement, and he eventually regained limited speaking ability. In the 2012-2013 season, the Twyman-Stokes Teammate of the Year award was introduced. Named after the two lifelong teammates, recognizes the league's ideal teammate who exemplifies selfless play and commitment and dedication to their team. 100%. Let's take it to the standings of this season. Starting off with the East, we have previous season MVP Bob Cousy and the MVP of this season, Bill Russell, who led the Celtics to a league best 49-23 record. The second seed, Syracuse Nationals, with a 41-31 record. The Philadelphia Warriors clinched the third seed with a 37-35 record. The New York Knicks failed to clinch a playoff spot, finishing fourth in the East with a record of 35-37. In the West, we had the St. Louis Hawks, who were led by Bob Pettit, finishing with a 41-31 record, followed by the Detroit Pistons and the Cincinnati Royals, both with 33 wins and 39 losses. And lastly, the Minneapolis Lakers finished with a league worst 19 wins and 53 losses, marking the first losing season in the franchise's history. I find it extremely crazy that back in the 50s, there were only 8 teams. Nowadays, we have 30, so it's like, really, like, what does it take to get top 3? Like, just go out there and ball. And speaking of that, we got to talk about the season leaders, the guys that were really balling out. And that brings us to our scoring champion of the 1957-1958 NBA
Homework.
season, George Yardley of the Detroit Pistons. Averaging 27.8 points per game, Yardley was the first player in NBA history to score 2,000 points in the season. He finished with 2,001. Leading the league in rebounds is that man himself, Bill Russell of the Celtics. This was his second year in the league, and he averaged 22.7 rebounds. And leading the league in dimes, assists per game, we have Bob Cousy of the Boston Celtics at 7.1. It's important to note that blocks, steals, and turnovers were not officially recorded as stats during the season. Let's talk about the All-Star Game real quick. The All-Star Game was played on January 21st, 1958 at the Kell Auditorium in St. Louis, Missouri. The East defeated the West 130-118, with Bob Pettit being named the game's MVP. In the first of 3 All-Star games held in St. Louis, a hometown star took home the MVP honors. Bob Pettit became the first player from a losing team to win the All-Star Game MVP after getting 28 points and 26 rebounds. This was the first All-Star game in NBA history in which both teams topped 100 points. The Eastern Conference All-Stars were Bob Cousy, Bill Russell, and Bill Sharman off the Boston Celtics, Willie Knowles, Richie Guerin, and Kenny Sears off the New York Knicks, Dolph Shades and Larry Costello of the Syracuse Nationals, and Paul Arzin and Neil Johnson of the Philadelphia Warriors. Now, I'm going to keep it a buck. If I'm saying any names wrong right now, just know, like, this is way before my time. I promise, once we make it to current day, I know everybody's name. Yo, hit a like real quick if you're here, by the way. Yo, drop a comment. What y'all think about this season so far? Like, were y'all tapped into this? Is this bringing back some memories? Or y'all new school just finding about this? Let me know. I need to know. The Western Conference stars were Bob Pettit and Cliff Hagan of the St. Louis Hawks, Maurice Stokes and Jack Twyman of the Cincinnati Royals, Slater Martin, Dick Garmaker, and Larry Faust of the Minneapolis Lakers, and George Yardley, Dick McGuire, and Gene Shue of the Detroit Pistons. Coaching the Western Conference was Alex Hannah. Coaching the Eastern Conference was Red Auerbach. All right, so let's get into the 1957-58 NBA season awards. The MVP of the year was Bill Russell of the Celtics with a stat line of 16.6 points, 2.9 assists, and 22.7 rebounds. Like I said before, blocks weren't a stat, but we can imagine how many blocks a game Bill Russell was getting. The Rookie of the Year was Woody Salisbury of the Philadelphia Warriors, averaging 12.8 points, 0.8 assists, and 10.3 rebounds. Next, we have the All-NBA First Team, Bob Pettit of the St. Louis Hawks, averaging 24.6 points, 2.2 assists, and 17.4 rebounds. George Yardley of the Detroit Pistons, averaging 27.8 points, 1.3 assists, and 10.7 rebounds. Bill Sharman of the Boston Celtics, averaging 22.3 points, 2.7 assists, and 4 rebounds. Bob Cousy of the Boston Celtics, averaging 18 points per game, 7.1 assists per game, and 5 rebounds a game. And Dolph Schayes of the Syracuse Nationals, averaging 24.9 points, 3.1 assists, and 14.2 rebounds per game. On the All-NBA second team, we had Cliff Hagan of the St. Louis Hawks, averaging 19.9 points, 2.5 assists, and 10.1 rebounds per game. Tom Gola of the Philadelphia Warriors, averaging 13.8 points, 5.5 assists, and 10.8 rebounds per game. Bill Russell of the Boston Celtics, again, averaging 16.6 points, 2.9 assists, and 22.7 rebounds. Slater Martin of the St. Louis Hawks, averaging 12 points per game, 3.6 assists a game, and 3.8 rebounds a game. And Maurice Stokes of the Cincinnati Royals, averaging 16.9 points a game, 6.4 assists, and 17.3 rebounds per game. Let's take a look at what the playoffs of the 1957-58 NBA season was looking like. The playoffs consisted of the top 3 teams from the Eastern and Western Division. In round 1, the Eastern Division semifinals featured the 3-seed Philadelphia Warriors beating the 2-seed Syracuse Nationals 2-1. The Western Division semifinals featured the 2-seed Detroit Pistons sweeping the Cincinnati Royals 2-0. In round 2 of the playoffs, we had the Eastern Division Finals, ending with the 1-seed Boston Celtics sending the Warriors home 4-1. The Western Conference ended similarly, with the 1-seed St. Louis Hawks defeating the Pistons 4-1. And finally, we get to the finals, the main event of the season, where we had the Boston Celtics facing off against the St. Louis Hawks. The Hawks were just coming off a Game 7 loss to the Celtics in prior year's season. In Game 1, the Hawks upset
double
the Celtics,
overtime,
104-102 at the Boston Garden. Boston took Game 2 with a big 136-112 win. Bill Russell severely sprained his ankle in Game 3, and the Hawks managed to capitalize and win 111-108. Even without Russell, the Celtics managed to even the series, winning Game 4 109-98. However, the Hawks took Game 5 in Boston, a clincher, 102-100. The Hawks smelled blood in Game 6 and led by Bob Pettit's 50-point performance, which happened to be a finals record at the time. Including 18 of the Hawks' final 21 points, they were able to defeat the Boston Celtics 4-2 in the NBA Finals. A fun fact, the Hawks were the last non-integrated team to win an NBA title. Every NBA champion since has had at least one black player. Spa World, that's wraps on the 1957-58 season. I'm going to be dropping these videos consistently on Sundays and Thursdays. Yo, stay tuned for the 1958-59 NBA season. If you made it this far, hit that like button. If you're new, hit that sub button. I'll catch you guys next video.
Very, very well done. Very intelligent young man who knows what he's talking about, appreciates and respects the history, and is kind enough to share it like Pythagoras. I had a great time tonight, guys. I hope that you did too. I always have a great time. You're the best part of every day that ends in Y, just like family. So thank you once again. And as far as monologue goes, I just want to touch on something. As far as the Kings go of Sacramento currently, their origins trace back to 1923 when they started a semi-pro team in Rochester, New York. But they weren't originally the Royals. No, they were originally the Rochester Seagrams. Yes, they eventually joined the NBA in 1948 after a stint in the NBL. Over the years, the franchise has been known as the Rochester Royals, the Cincinnati Royals, the Kansas City Omaha Kings, the Kansas City Kings, and finally, here we are, the Sacramento Kings. And they are the longest tenured NBA team in history. So, something to keep in mind. We went over a lot of things tonight, and There's a lot of information out there, so if you feel the need to rewatch it, feel free to. It highlights the importance of knowing where everything came from, where it's going, and just being able to respect the game in general. So when it comes down to it, you have to know as much as you can and try to learn as much as you can to objectively see all the contestants, to objectively be able to say, hey, this guy versus this guy. No, you got to be able to see all the contestants before you make the final assessment of who goes where, in what order, and what ranking. I personally feel that it's not fair to do, simply because it's not so much eras. It's got less to do with eras than it does to do with the fact that you have intangibles, and that is timeless. You have variables you can't account for. You have greatness. You have natural skill and ability. That has not changed. The game of basketball has evolved. Similar, if you want to, parallel it to forensics and crime and finding out who done it. So it's just a different perspective on things. Like I said, hopefully you learn some things about the past, about certain players, people that they called plumbers and bums and part-time this, and just, it was a different time. It was a different league. They've made improvements. In my monologue, to finish things off, thank you to those other creators of making quality content on these smaller channels. That's quality stuff. Keep doing your thing. I don't want to become a reaction channel, but if I find something that's relevant to the topic that I'm discussing, I want there to be context to go along with it and follow up with what I've already said in order to confirm what I've said and validate it, because we've got footage and we've got facts, and you're not going to dispute those. Okay? Aside from that, I want to continue to do things regarding sports, but I've also been known to dive into politics and hot topics. So drop some comments. Let me know what you guys are into. I'm not afraid to speak to anything. And like I said, I don't shy away from anyone. I appreciate everybody's support. Thank you all very much for tuning in. If you haven't done so already, hit that like, subscribe, share, follow, and on whatever platform you're on. I appreciate you all the same. And aside from that, I wish you guys nothing but the best. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday evening. We'll see you guys again tomorrow for the watch-a-thon. That's going to be 7 Central Standard Time. And, we might go a couple hours, depends on how the knees feel. And they don't feel good right now, but that's perfectly normal too. But I've got plenty of ice packs. So, yeah. Guys, you're the best. I think I've got the best subscribers. I think the subscribers that I do have, regardless if there's 59 or 59,000, I'm going to treat you all the same. I respect you. I respect your comments, your feedback, your opinion. And I appreciate all the interaction. So thank you all very much again for everything. And this is Mad Max from the Jump Off Variety Show, letting you know that we'll be back tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. Can't wait. And we out. Nothing but love. Deuces.